In this class, we're going to be talking about your standard everyday walk. Not personality walks. We're going to be going over those in another class. But for this class, we want you guys just to focus on your standard everyday walk, because we feel that once you guys understand how to approach animating a walk, once you get into more complex situations, it's going to be that much easier for you guys to tackle. When we talked to many professional animators in the industry, they all had one thing to say about animating walks.
Oh God, I hate walk cycles.
They're hard. But it's easy to do a walk, but it's hard to do a good walk.
It's like the hardest thing, but it's like the most basic thing you start doing when you're learning animation.
In animation, a walk is considered hard because it's a complete full body movement. The whole body is involved, and most every principle of animation is included in a good walk. Arcs, rhythm, weight, timing, and so on. And as much as walks are hard, I found some techniques that really help me to break the movement down so that I can study it and kind of put that into my work easily and quickly. And I'm going to be teaching that to you guys today. Bali will be the character that you guys are using on your walks. If you look at Bali, you'll see a center curve that we added. This is really a visual way for us to see that the hips are rotating correctly. Otherwise, it's a ball and it's really hard to see if it is rotating. So we added this curve so that we can visually see if the rotation in the hips is acting correctly. Bali is really just a more complex version of a bouncing ball. But again, most characters are just an advanced version of the bouncing ball. So we're going to be going over a few key concepts and terms in this class. These key terms and concepts give us animators a way to break down the movement and give us a vocabulary in which to talk about walks. Let's go ahead and look at some of these key concepts. First of all, when we're talking about a vanilla walk, all we're really talking about is your basic, everyday, standard walk. A cycle is really just a full stride from one foot back to that same foot again. For this class, this is what we'll call a cycle. In film, when we're animating a walk, we typically don't just animate one cycle, because that repeated one cycle, it'll start to look pretty mechanical.
Freaking walk cycles look like cycles, and if you're going to do a walk cycle, I would really consider doing like at least 100 frames of walking and then cycle that, or something like that, because if you just have like a 16 frame walk cycle, any little thing that is anything other than the most subtle animation possible is going to read, and it's going to jump out to you. And even a blink, if you got a guy walking and he blinks and he's freaking blinking every 16 frames, it's going to look ridiculous. But if you can avoid having to do that 16 frame walk cycle, and you have the liberty to just go for it and do like 100, 150 frames of walking and then kind of cycle it back, I would totally go for that, because no two steps are going to really be the same. Maybe you get two that are the same, but that third step is going to be different. The timing is going to be different. The way the arms swing is going to be a little bit different. Nobody walks perfectly. Nobody moves perfectly.
Contact position is where the heel meets the ground or makes contact with the ground. As we look at this simple walk, we can see that the contact position happens from the right foot, then to the left foot, and back to the right foot again, or one full cycle. We've been talking a lot about breakdowns, but again, simply, breakdowns are a way of defining the trajectory from one key to the next key. In a walk, the breakdown is really the passing position, the point at which our hips are directly over our leg as we pass down to the next contact position. This position really tells us how we're getting from one key contact pose to the next key contact pose. In a walk, we really have two main extreme positions. This is our extreme down position. The next and final extreme position of the walk is right after the breakdown. This is the extreme high point of the walk. It's easy to think that the high point of the walk is the breakdown, but really it's not. We actually raise slightly higher as we begin to fall forward. This is the extreme high point on the passing position. These are really the key concepts and terms you'll need to help you define any walk, but there's still a few more things to note on a basic vanilla walk. If we stop it on any contact position, we can see several key things. What do you see here? For starters, the contact leg is completely straight. The back leg has a slight bend to it. This is really two major key points for animation. The straight frame allows us to imply weight. Because our next main position is the down extreme, it will be a contrast in shape between straight and bent. This gives a feeling of taking the weight. The next thing to look at is the path of action on the heels. It's actually doing something much different than what I first thought. We might think that the leg picks straight up and moves in a simple arc across the screen. This is really not what is happening. It's actually much more like this. Now that we know what we're looking for, our main key poses, our breakdowns, and our extremes, it's now important to know and look at how to time these drawings out. For a basic vanilla walk, it's pretty easy to break the timing down. This is really meant as a formula that you can experiment with. It is not the base for every walk, but it is a typical timing of most basic vanilla walks. If we study most any vanilla walk, you will inevitably find a similar timing. If we look at the span of one full cycle in any basic live action reference, we can see that generally the timing is almost exactly 1 second. It happens all over the place. If we stand up and walk ourselves and just say 1/1000, we'll be pretty close to 1 full second for 1 full cycle. This really makes defining a walk that much easier, but the first thing we got to define is where each contact position is. So if we look at a basic walk in terms of 1 second, that is 24 frames. That means we can start off by having the first contact position on frame 0, and to make that 1 cycle, that frame would repeat on frame 24. Why frame 0? We want to see frame 0 for 2 reasons. For one, it would create a pop in the cycle to have everything on ones and then repeat the same exact frame twice. So that would create a pop. So for that reason, we're going to be playing either frames 0 through 23 or 1 through 24, whichever you choose. And secondly, it allows us to keep the spacing equal between the keys. If we start out on frame 1 and then have frame 12 in the middle, it only gives us 11 frames from frame 1 to 12 instead of 12 frames. That's a pretty common mistake a lot of people make when animating a walk based on 1 second. It makes one side 1 frame faster, so it gives the illusion that one side is speeding up a little bit more than the other side, which kind of almost creates the illusion of there being a pop. Now if a walk is based on 1 second and our first contact keys are on frames 0 and 24, then our second contact key must be on frame 12, right? Yep, this is correct. If we look at the walk now and break it into half seconds, we can see how this is true. It's happening all over the place. It's pretty amazing how this works. So now that we have our contact positions defined, our next big step is to find out where the breakdowns are. Again, on a vanilla walk, I find it easy to keep breaking things down. Since a vanilla walk is pretty much a somewhat even motion, we can put them between each contact position, or on frames 6 and 18. Our final step is to define where our extremes are. There's an extreme down position and our extreme up position. Let's first start off with the 2 down positions. If we continue to break things down, we can put each down position on frames 3 and 15, or halfway between the contact pose and the breakdown pose. Now we need to find our extreme high positions. These will naturally fall on frames 9 and 21, or halfway between the breakdown and contact positions. Once we have all this information, we really have the whole essence of the walk defined. But before we jump into animating the walk, I thought it would be important to look at some live action reference more in depth to see actually what is happening on each of these key positions. Here is your average walk, pretty even in timing. First, let's bring it back to what we understand so far. If we try to identify where the bouncing ball is on this walk, we can clearly see that it is in the whole hip area of the walk. It's nice to really start here and apply the things that we understand so far about timing. The hang time at the top of the arc is longer, and then comes down quicker, then bounces back up to the top arc and hangs again. This is really the whole timing and spacing of the bouncing ball that we've discussed so far. This really is just a more advanced bouncing ball. The next important thing to look at is what is happening in the hip area. The leg that is forward or contacting makes that side of the hip want to rotate out so that it can reach out and get a full extension. Because the hips are really one unit, this makes the hip of the trailing leg rotate back. This is just the natural action in the body. An important thing to note here is that we always treat the hips as one object. We don't treat them as separate sections. The hips are one connected object, so when one moves forward, the other one naturally moves backwards, back and forth. Generally, the hips are really one of the most important areas on the human body for generating movement and change. This is really one of the major things lacking in students' work. They really forget how important the hips are to the action, especially an action like a walk. The last thing we need to look at before we start animating the walk is the overlapping action happening in the hip area. The forward rotation of the hip is actually overlapping the up and down movement of the body, the same exact way it does on a bouncing ball. Again, this motion is more subtle, but it really adds a lot to the walk in terms of loosening up the overall movement. A walk is really a controlled fall. With each step, we put the next foot down to catch ourselves from falling. This is what makes us move forward. If we didn't put our leg out in front of us to catch us from falling, we would fall right on our face. Now that we have all this information, it's important to see it in action. So let's go ahead and animate the walk. Because this is really one of the first actions that we've talked about in terms of keys and breakdowns, I really want you guys to try to animate this in a pose-to-pose fashion. So we'll be working with stepped keys. If you're using a computer as your main tool, it's important to switch your curves from flat to stepped keys. The name might be different, but this concept is the same. To see how to do this, see the Intermediate Maya Basics for Animators class. This allows us to see only the poses we have created, as opposed to having the computer do any in-betweens for us. Alright, we've finally arrived at the computer, and we're going to start animating now, and I know that's a super exciting part of the process. The important thing to note here is that we've already done the bulk of the work. We've gathered reference, we've looked at reference, we've observed reference, we know our breakdowns, our extremes, and our key poses are. We know where they land on the frames that they're going to land on based on our observation from the reference. So now, literally, it's going to be putting that information into the computer. And one small thing I do before I go on is, based on what I've observed, I go and I make little thumbnail drawings. What these thumbnails give me is a basic roadmap on where to start. Now that I know that information, I don't have to keep going back and forth to the live action reference. I make those observations on a sketchbook or a little piece of paper. We make little notes on them. We just basically kind of derive where the main motion, that information, what it's going to be, what it's going to look like in the end. Alright, so here we are inside of Maya. I'm going to go ahead first and show you guys a couple of things I do to maximize my workspace. So the first thing I want to do is to make sure that my keys are set to the proper style in which I want to be animating. So I go ahead and click down here in the animation preferences, and I go to the animation settings, and I'm going to make sure that my tangents are set on weighted tangents, clamped in, and stepped for the out. And I'm going to change that a little later when I start refining it. I might put them into linear. But for this blocking stage, I just want to do that. I want to set it once and just be done with it. The next thing I want to do is to make a character set. A character set is going to allow me to see when I don't have anything selected. It'll show me little tick marks in the timeline where I have animation set based on that character set. So for instance, if I set a key right now on the leg and I just say key here, you can see that there's a tick mark right here on frame 8. However, when I deselect, that goes away. So once I have a character set, it will display all keys that I have set for anything that's within that selected character set. Okay, so in order to make a character set, what I want to do is select the controls that I'm going to be using. So there's really 3 main controls on Balli that I want to use for this animation. It's the 2 foot controls and the main body control. So I'm going to go ahead and create a character set. Make sure I'm in animation mode here and go over to character, create character set, and I'm going to call this one all select and create character set. And now down here in the little character set window, I can see that the all select has been selected and it shows that to me here. I can also say none, and then it won't show me any keys in the timeline window. So if I do want the possibility to not see any clutter in there, or if later I just want to make a character set just for one leg and just see the tick marks in the timeline for that one leg, that I can do that. So for me, for this animation, I'm going to set it to all select so that I can see all keys on the things that I'm going to be animating. The next thing I'm going to do is set auto key on. I just like to use that. It's really helpful for me. And then the final thing is setting my frame range. So I'm going to go ahead and set the frame range from 0 to 24. And one last thing I want to do is to hide everything here. I don't want to see the joints or anything. The only things I want to see in my shot are the things that I'm going to need to animate or to see the motion. So I'm going to go ahead here and say select none, and then I'm going to go back through here. I'm going to turn on the NURBS curves, the NURBS surfaces, polygons, and that should give me everything that I'm going to need to see for this animation. And with that, let's dive into the animation. Alright, so now for the fun part. We're in here and we're ready to start animating. So the first thing I'm going to do is think back to what I was talking about in the lecture, and that was to identify our keys, the contact positions. So that's how I'm actually going to start this animation. I'm going to go ahead and start posing out my character. Go ahead, move him forward a little bit here. See, just kind of eyeball it, something like that. Go ahead and bring the leg forward. And the stride length is really important to keep in mind, because the tendency is to make the stride length, the distance between the feet, really wide, but that can really make the walk have some personality to it. And I know that personality walks are going to be something that you're learning a little bit later in this term. However, we're focusing here on a vanilla walk, so we don't want to push things too much. That's one of the things that I'm going to keep in mind here when I'm doing this, is to not have the stride length too far out. Okay, so I'm just going to think about all the things that go into this contact frame. The thing to note here is that you're going to go in and tweak these poses a lot along the way. So one of the things that I'm going to do here is just make sure that there's a little bit of rotation in the hips, and I'm just going to focus on the Y rotation now. Later we'll get into the X rotation. I actually get into that a little bit later, kind of when I'm refining things. So I try to just keep it relatively simple in the beginning. So this looks like a decent stride length. You can see here that with that little Y rotation that I put in here, that the leg is just rotating out in the direction that the foot is going in. And so for me, that looks like a decent first contact frame for my vanilla walk. So I'm going to pick the 3 curves that I have here, and I'm going to go into Animate, and I'm going to go to the Set Key options and make sure that it's set to all keyable attributes. That's very important to me. I'm going to say Apply and Set Key. So now you can see here that I have that tick mark right here, If I deselect, now nothing's selected, it's still in the timeline. So that's the benefit of having the character set. So I know with this vanilla walk, the timing is pretty much roughed out for me. So my next contact pose is going to be the next pose that I set. And I'm going to go to frame 12 and set the next contact pose. So when I'm doing a vanilla walk, it's important that both sides look roughly as close to each other as they possibly can, because it's just going to be somewhat generic and somewhat symmetrical. And once you get into the refining part of the animation, you can tweak things up a little bit. So I kind of wind up copying some of the values from different areas. So I can see here I'm keeping it simple. I'm just animating the foot roll is 26. So I'm going to go to this foot roll and type in 26. And my auto key is set, so that did just set a key. I'm going to go back here and look at this, and this one's on -37. So when I go to frame 12 here, I'm going to go on the foot roll and do a -37. And then I'm going to go ahead and move this foot forward. And then at least I know I'm just going to move it in Z. So I'm just dragging that I'm getting it roughly in the same world. Okay. And another thing I'm going to do, just going to go ahead and select these things. Even though auto key's on, I'm hitting the S key now to set a key on everything. I'm going to go back to frame 0. I'm going to look at the rotation I have on this value, and here it's rotate Y, it's -10. So I'm going to go to this value here and just make it 10, and then that's going to rotate the foot out for the foot that is planted forward. Okay. So I don't mean to be so mathematical with the animation, but for me it's helpful when I'm just starting. I don't typically animate a shot like this mathematically, but it does help me to make the vanilla walk look as close as it possibly can, and that to me is kind of important, especially the first couple times you're doing a vanilla walk. So now I'm going to go ahead and step through the keys, the two keys that I have right now, and take a look at them, and they look pretty similar. There's the same roughly amount of negative space here as there is here, so that looks pretty good. And then my final bit is my final contact key, which is pretty much the same as frame 0 but just moved forward. So I'm going to go to frame 24 and do the same thing I did here. I'm actually not going to copy this key and move it forward personally. I'm just going to go ahead and set the values like I did previously. So here we'll go ahead 26 and -37. So here we go, 26, and here -37. And then that way at least we know our feet are in the proper position. And then this is going to be -10 on the Y. I can go ahead and then move this forward here and move this forward as well. So it's not the most exciting thing to watch, but hey, here it is. So let's go ahead here. I think we can go ahead and move this forward a little bit more. Cool. So let's go ahead. I'm going to step to frame 1 and frame 24 by using my little step to the keys here, and these look relatively close to me, good enough for this demonstration for sure. It actually doesn't really make so much sense to play it right now, so I just kind of step through the keys here and make sure that they look pretty close. They work. The stride lengths aren't too far, and that's pretty much as far as I would take it for now. In the next step, we're going to get into the breakdown pose, or the passing position. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Alright, let's take a look at the breakdowns. We know where they're going to land now. They're going to land on frame 6 and on frame 18. So let's go ahead and do our first breakdown pose. So let's go to frame 6. First thing I know that's going to happen is the foot's going to be planted on the ground flat. And we can go ahead and bring this pretty much right over the center here, kind of taking a look at the center line. Bring this up because he's going to be raising up here. It's also the passing position, so I'm going to go ahead and take out the Y rotation because the hips are pretty much going to be right center squared right over itself. And then I'm going to go ahead and pose this guy. lifting that foot up for the passing position. You kind of just tweak up this foot roll here. Let's see. Like that, and then put a little ball roll in there, so just to kind of keep the foot flat. I'm going to go ahead and just leave it like that for now. Okay, so let's go ahead here and see passing position, and oftentimes I'll just kind of stand up and if I'm animating something and take a look. One thing is I don't want the passing position too high, kind of just want the foot right off the ground. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at that. So we don't want it to be a big, pick up the foot and arc step over. So I just want to keep the foot as close to the ground as I can on a vanilla walk. It just kind of keeps it more plain. The higher the foot picks up and the floppier the foot is and that kind of thing, the more cartoony it looks. So even though Bali is a somewhat cartoony looking character, the principles that we're doing here work generally. So if you had a very human looking character and you were doing these principles, it's going to look pretty realistic once it's all said and done. So let's go ahead now and select these guys, hit the S key, so we got that all set up, and now that is good to go. So now we're pretty much going to go to frame 18 and do the same exact thing. Go ahead and take the foot roll out, get the hips squared over here. Alright, take out that rotation, get the foot here, something like that, and that foot like that. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of just jump between these two. I'm taking a look personally right now at the negative space that's in here on frame 18, and there seems to be a lot more negative space in this one, so I'm going to go ahead and dial it back a little bit. Let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, and also the negative space in here. Those are two little identifiers for me, and that looks pretty close. Looks pretty good. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead again, select my controls, and hit the S key. And that's our passing position. So now let's go ahead and press play and see what we get. So you're kind of just starting to see that come together. Still not a lot to see yet, but hey, I like to just kind of see how things are playing through right early on. In the next phase, when we start to add the extremes, we'll really start to see the whole walk come together. But for now, that's the breakdown stage, and let's dive into the extremes. The first thing I'm going to do before I go any further is to save my shot. It's important that you always save often. That's one of the key critical things. Once you have it set up, you can always just hit save. I like to save iterations so I can always go back and see where I'm at. So let's go ahead and save scene as. Okay, I'm going to go make a little folder here, and I'm going to go ahead and call this Keys Breakdowns 01, and I'm going to save it as an ASCII file. I save it as a .ma just because if I need any technical assistance or I break something, I can have someone go into the ASCII file. Not necessarily me, because I might not know how to do that, but someone technical could go in, and if there's something that gets corrupted, the ASCII file allows them to go in a text-based file and find some areas, and many times it's saved me. So I always recommend that everything is saved in .ma. And I always give it a little name so I know what it is. So keys breakdowns, and then if I work on keys and breakdowns for a little while longer, I might call that keys breakdowns 02. So it's pretty self-explanatory, but it's just important to set that up in your shot and have it as part of your workflow. So save often, alright? Okay, so now we're going to talk about the extremes. There's two extremes. There's the extreme up position and the extreme down position. Let's go ahead and focus on the extreme down positions first. So as we noted in the lecture, the extreme down positions are going to happen on frames 3 and on frames 15, or basically halfway between the first key pose and the breakdown pose. Alright, so let's go ahead and pose this out. Again, first thing I'm going to do, make sure that foot is flat on the ground there. And since this is an extreme down position, I know it's going to be coming down, not too far down, okay? Because once you start playing with that up and down, even just playing with that up and down curve when you're refining, it's kind of fun because it really will change the dynamic of the animation, okay? And one of the things I'm going to do here is go ahead and just roll this foot up a little bit more. There we go. Have him going forward a little bit. And right now I'm just kind of eyeballing it, kind of making sure that this knee is over the ankle. Don't want it to go too far ahead. That's going to be too much. So I kind of just get up again and kind of feel it out. What does that feel like? It's probably going to be down a little bit too much. So I'll play with this a lot as I go. But I'm going to go ahead and select my controllers and hit S. And then I'm just going to step through that and see how that feels. Okay? So down, up. Cool. Down, up. Okay. Because it's a vanilla walk, it doesn't have a lot to it, and it is a vanilla walk, so it's not the most exciting thing to animate, but it's important just getting all these key concepts and principles in there. That's really what's going to help the most. Okay, so I put a little bit more down on that because I just wanted to see some change there. Okay. And that might be too much when I get into it, but that seems to work pretty good. So once I have my keys and breakdowns in there, a lot of information is in there, and I kind of start to leverage that information. Something as simple as knowing that that foot is hitting the right place at the right time. And you'll see I'm just using a couple of controls to really block all this animation in there. You don't need to get too complicated and add all sorts of stuff in there. It's really keeping it, for me, as simple as possible while being able to have the essence of the pose in there. Alright? Cool. So let's go ahead to frame 15 now. We're halfway between this key and the breakdown. So frame 15. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing, and then we'll check those frames to see how they're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and drag it over first, bring it down a little bit, probably back, just kind of keeping an eye on that knee. Go ahead and roll this guy up here. Roll this up. Okay, it's probably a little bit too much. Oh, and one thing that I didn't do, which I'll go back to in just a second, is the Y rotation in the hips. See, it's good that we're doing this. So I'm going to go ahead and just save that, and I'm going to go back to 3 here. And I know that the first key, we have it extended out here in Y with this rotating forward, and then on the breakdown it's at 0. So this is halfway between, so I'm actually going to put it halfway. And again, this is somewhat mathematical. It works pretty good for the vanilla walk. You can mess with it a little bit later if you'd like to, but this is just what I'm doing, just to keep them as close to the same on both sides as possible, at least for this demonstration. Alright, so I've set this one to 5, and I think this leg here is much too much straight. It should definitely have a little bit of bend in it. So I'm going to go back to my reference key that I liked here, and I'm going to go ahead and check it, and I just think it's too far forward and maybe not enough down. So I'll take a look at the down here, -3.26, -3.26, just trying to mimic that as much as I can. Okay, so I'm noticing that the hips are quite a bit back for the angle of this knee here, and where it is here, and where it is here. So when I'm taking a look at this down extreme here, I'm noticing they look pretty similar. I'm looking again at the negative space kind of in this area and taking a look at that, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to set keys here again, select my controls, hit S, and go ahead and just play the animation so I can kind of start to see it. So we've got one more set of extremes, that's the up extremes, and once we put those in there, this walk is really going to start to come together. But I can already start to see how it's working, and it does. It looks pretty basic. The up and down, the down portion is probably a little bit too much for me right now for a vanilla walk, and I'll go ahead and adjust that a little bit later. So now let's do the up extreme poses. Now from the video lecture, we noticed that they're halfway between the breakdown pose and the contact pose. So other words, on frame 9 and on frame 21. And so this stuff is pretty straightforward. It is, again, somewhat mathematical, and it's not necessarily the best way to animate, but it works pretty darn good for this vanilla walk stuff. So since this is the extreme up position, it's going to be up slightly here. Go ahead and bring the foot forward. I'm going to leave the foot as close to the ground again as I can, so I'm just going to have it come up just a little bit, so there's a little bit of an arc here as it starts to pass forward. And I'll go ahead and play with this pose here a little bit and see if it works or if I need to adjust anything. So if you're ever unsure about a pose, if you think that the heel is going to start lifting here and you're not too sure, you can just get up and act it out and see. So for me, I'm going to go ahead and leave the heel on the ground here on this extreme up position. It's going to start coming up for me after this pose. And one last thing I want to do here is make sure that I begin to rotate out a little bit as that foot starts to go. So I'm going to put it halfway between its most extreme forward motion, which is going to be on the contact frame. And so the contact frame is at 10, is rotated at 10 here. You can see in Y. So here I'm going to go ahead and put it at 5. So I'm going to go ahead now and select my key controls and hit S. And now I'm going to go ahead and pretty much attempt to recreate this pose here on frame 21. So here we go. First thing I'm going to do here, I'll go ahead and put that out. Start to move this forward and up. And bring this just forward here and up a little bit as well. Okay, gotta love that auto key, but still, I never trust it too much. Let's go ahead and take a look at the negative space here in this area. Kind of take a look and see if I can match that. Where am I at? Frame 21. So I'm going to look at frame 9. Also looking at this heel for a reference in frame 21. So it looks like I can bring this forward a little bit more. Forward, hit S, take a look at that. So 9 and 21. Alright, great. So there we are with that. So now I have my keys, my breakdowns, my up extremes, and my down extremes. So let's go ahead and play this animation. It's pretty cool. I mean, I'm excited as an animator being able to apply certain principles of animation. And still there's a long way to go, but you can really get the essence. The whole essence of the walk is already there. That's what we talked about in the class, but now you can really start to see it come to life. One of the things I'm noticing here is that the foot roll here is off, so I'm going to go ahead and set that. Set the key. So it looks like that somehow got off. I'm going to double check it on all my frames again, just make sure they're good. And go ahead and press play. And that's kind of one of the things of press and play, is always making sure, because sometimes if you're just relying on auto key, you're never too sure if it's actually working or not. And so I always want to make sure to play my animation and just look at certain areas, just kind of isolate certain areas like the feet or the hips, make sure the hips are at least rotating. Right now they're only rotating in Y, and in a little bit we'll go ahead and rotate them in X as well. So we're really just focusing on this walk from a side view, and this is a really great way to break down such a complex action, because really when you start getting into taking a walk into perspective, you're really just starting to play a little bit more with some of the other axis, you know, the translating the feet out, rotating the feet out, and so forth. So before we jump into the next section of refining the animation, there's a couple of additional areas I want to take you through first. Alright, so before I go forward at all, I'm going to go ahead and make sure to save my scene. So I've already gone ahead and saved it here once as keys, breakdowns, and extremes. I'm going to go ahead and make a second copy of that there, because now I'm feeling pretty good and I can rest assured that my animation is saved. I can take a deep breath and know that it's all captured and I'm all good just in case something happens. But beyond just saving, it's important that you back up your work as well. It's definitely happened where Animation Mentor students and people just in general, their hard drive crashes and they lose everything. So go ahead and make sure to purchase yourself even just a simple little 2 gig flash drive where you can go ahead and plug it in and save your animation files. It's important to keep them backed up because you never know when you're going to want to go back into them. You're going to want to go back into them from time to time, and it's important to start getting into the good habits. Saving often, saving iterations, and backing up your work. Super, super key. Okay, so now I'm going to move into the second phase of animation. For me, this is blocking. This gives me all the information that I need. I can kind of see what's happening. I could clearly show this to a director and they'd know the character's walking, they see the timing, the cadence, all of it, and they just allow me to start refining it from there and take it to final. So some of the things I do first before just kind of saying, okay, now I'm just going to throw everything into smooth splines and just start tweaking. Before I do that, there's some extra additional pieces I want to add in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is, now that I'm moving into the refining part of the animation, I'm going to go ahead and switch my key types to linear. So anything I save from here on out are going to be linear keys. I'm then going to go ahead and select the controls, the 3 controls I've been using, open up the graph editor and throw everything into linear. Alright, so now you guys are going to see some pretty bad animation. Okay, there's nothing here, it's just the straight information. So let's go ahead and take a look at it. Okay, so it's not super bad. One of the cool things I'm taking a look at right away is that the hips are rotating in Y. Can really see, subtly, but see those feet extending out there as it's walking. I can see that generally the animation looks pretty solid. Things aren't popping. There's no weird gimbal lock stuff going on. Everything seems to be landing. The up and downs are going on, and that feels pretty good. So I'm feeling good about that. So now here's the fun part of the animation. I'm going to start borrowing from some of the keys. I'm going to do the takeoff position, kind of refine that a little bit more, and then I'm going to do the straight leg position on the landing. So let's go ahead and do the straight leg on the landing position. So frame 12 is the contact pose. I'm going to go to frame 11 because one of the things that's super important in a walk for me, and a vanilla walk in general, that we observed in the class is that there is that straight leg. And the thing is, if I play it right now and you watch the animation, it never really looks like the legs go straight. You don't really see it, maybe except for here at the end. But you don't really see that because it's moving in and out so quickly. And it's not something you really, really want to see, but in animation we want to exaggerate things, alright? So one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to frame 12 and see where that foot is landing. I'm going to then go and middle mouse back 1 frame, and I'm going to go ahead and set keys there. So I hit the S key. So now when I go to frame 11, it's got a straight leg here. So it's got a straight leg basically for 2 frames. I copied the frame from frame 12 and put it on frame 11. So now you'll see that leg, it's arriving a little too soon, and it's also speeding up a little quicker now. And I don't want it to just stay there, but I do want to straighten the leg, and that's probably a little bit too much. I'm going to bring it back and also bring it up a little bit and kind of play with this a little bit, because my thing with the vanilla walk, or the legs in general, is I don't mind having that straight, and I don't mind it overextending so it seems to go past where it's going and then land back into position. So on that frame before, it can really feel like it's swinging past and then landing in the proper position. Okay, I'm just jumping from key to key here. Alright, cool. So it swings out a little bit there. Whoop. And then sets into place. Okay, and the effect it's going to have is it's going to feel like that foot's really swinging out there pretty quickly. But once we get into refining it, it's going to feel pretty good. The next frame we want to go to is frame 23, and also do that same technique where we're going to go ahead and copy the previous frame here. So by clicking frame 24 and using the middle mouse to drag back, I'm just going to go ahead and set keys here on the translate X, Y, and Z, so I can have everything else moving. Whoops. I'm actually going to take the foot roll as well and set a key on that. Okay. Oh, and the ball roll. Gotta grab everything here. Don't leave anything behind. Alright. So now we see that that foot gets there and then just stops. So I'm going to go ahead again and just really clean this up. Take it back and up. Just really kind of play with that a little bit. See what I get. Okay. So it's really swinging out there. Whoop. Whoop. Cool. Go ahead and press play. Alright. Starting to refine it. And the cool thing is this has now all the in-betweens. It's in linear mode. So really what we see is what we get. And of course, to me, it's still really jerky. The knees are popping. Things aren't really working so perfectly, but I'm just laying in the foundation so that when I start to get in there and refine the rest of the animation, it's going to work pretty well for cleaning up and smoothing things out.
That boy is our last hope.
No, there is another.
Wait, really? Who's our last hope?
Alright, the next section I'm going to do is the takeoff position. Now that we've really kind of locked in that contact position and really selling it by adding that additional straight frame for the leg, we want to do the same thing for frame 4 and for frame 16, and these are effectively the takeoff positions. So frame 3, here's our down extreme. Frame 4, 5, and 6, then it gets to the breakdown position. We want to mimic that same kind of thing we did with the straight frame so that you can really sell that and sell that there's weight, there's going to be that contrast in shape between straight and bent, so you kind of visually see it a little bit more. You're not going to see it perfectly, but you'll feel it. The same thing is here. If I look at this back foot between frame 3 and 4, it's just lifting up. It's magically lifting up. And the only real way in life that something can lift up like that is if this foot is pushing it off. So effectively what we want to do is keep that foot on the frame for one frame longer and really milk that the leg is pushing up. And so we're going to go ahead and do that. So we go to frame 3, middle mouse forward to frame 4. I'm going to go ahead and set my keys here on the translates and the foot rolls. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead then and take a look at that, and then we're going to go ahead and push this foot roll as far as we can. Kind of see if we can get a little bit of bend in the leg, if at all possible. And we can't, so we may have to adjust the forward momentum there. Or maybe not. Maybe that will work. Maybe that nice little straight there will kind of give it that feeling of push. So really pushing off there. Could probably work pretty nice. So we'll go ahead and take a look at that. It's probably going to be a big contrast in shape between frame 4 and frame 5. It's going to really read like a pop. So I might go in and adjust this a little bit later, and I'll show you how to take care of the knee popping in a little bit later section. Okay, and then we'll go to frame 16, which is effectively again the same thing. We'll copy that by a middle mouse dragging to frame 16. Go ahead and set a key here on the translates and the foot rolls. And then we'll kind of take a look at what we've got. Go ahead and roll that foot roll up. Okay, and hit S on that. Okay, and then I'm going to go back here and see just how much that I foot roll. I took it to 70. I'm going to do roughly the same thing here. Take it to 70. Great. Alright, so that concludes the cleanup for me on those straight legs and the takeoff position. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. Okay, there's a lot of popping in the knees, which is cool. If I can kind of use my imagination to not really notice that right now and just kind of take a look a little bit more at what the feet are doing. You can really see that that additional frame for the takeoff position, wow, that really helps a lot. I mean, you can really see that foot peeling off the ground, really rolling up and then pushing forward and then getting that nice straight leg there. That's feeling really good, and it's kind of adding some timing here as well. because we're not just having everything so perfect. By having that foot kind of swing forward a little bit more, it's adding a little bit of snap, a little bit of spice to that animation. Alright, now let's go ahead and take a look at how to make this animation feel a little bit more weighty. One of the things I'm noticing here on the contact, when the foot contacts the ground, is that it's taking 1, 2, 3 frames before it hits the ground. And one of the things that makes a really good solid walk cycle is right after that heel hits, that the foot slams down on the ground on the next frame. And then I usually drag the toe a little bit to have it go over 2 frames so that the heel hits, the foot then would come down, and then on the following frame the toe can land. And that really helps the foot feel really solid. It's kind of a tip and trick that I use. It's not necessarily something set in stone that everyone uses, but a good solid foot contact really makes your walk feel like it has some solidity and some weight to it. If the foot just kind of slowly floats down like that, it doesn't really feel that it's grounded, and it doesn't feel connected and solid, and it feels a little bit too much like the computer's doing too much work for you. And also, because we added that extra straight frame there, so you're really going to see that straight frame, and then when the foot comes down, it's going to feel really solid. So it's just putting all the right touches in all the right areas to really make this work. So let's go ahead and do that and see what we get. So I'm just going to kind of go straight ahead through the shot now and kind of do that for the different sections where the foot contacts the ground. So okay, I'm going to move to frame 2 and roll that down. I'll go back through it in a moment and do the drag on the toe, but first I'm just getting this really solid. It's going to look really weird when you first do it until after you add the toe drag, otherwise it feels a little bit like it pops. Okay, so here on the next frame, go ahead and take that down to 0. Trusting my auto key here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and play that, and it's going to look really flat-footed and really stompy. Okay, but it definitely feels pretty weighted and pretty solid. So the next step is going to be using that ball roll to really drag that foot, really make that work. So I'm going to see where the foot's coming from. Okay, I'm actually just going to go ahead and bring up the ball roll and go ahead and frame that. I'm going to keep the frame on frame 0. I'm going to remove all these other keys here except for the ones I need where it takes off. I'm going to do the same thing here on this ball roll, and the reason why is I'm pretty much just going to go straight ahead now through the shot and animate the toe roll how I think it's going to work best, because there's going to be a little bit of drag and a little bit of follow through going on, and I like to kind of sometimes straight ahead that when I'm cleaning things up. Now with a walk, there's so many things to think about, and when you think about stepped animation, you don't have to get every single thing in there for every single pose. You want to get the essential things in there, and then you can always layer and pepper things in on top of it. To me, that's kind of the beauty of using straight ahead animation and pose to pose key animation. So we've done pose to pose animation now, and now we're really kind of going straight ahead through the animation and really refining it. Okay, so now let me see my keys here. Alright, it's starting to come down. Alright, so I like where this one is. There's a little bit of a drag here on that one. Okay, so we'll go ahead and step forward. Let's see, bring. So I think that toe's gonna roll up here a little bit. Go to the next frame. Probably drag it a little bit more, and then go to the next frame. Bam! And I'm going to probably drag it quite a bit right there, and then on the next frame I'm going to bring it down to 0 so that it's really solid. And the effect is there's a little bit of a drag there. It might look a little floppy footed, so we can always go into the curve and really just adjust that up and down section for the foot. But I'm going to go ahead and leave it like this right now and just see what it looks like once we're done. Okay, It's really kind of like adding that spice to the animation. I really love that. So a little bit of drag here. Make sure to set a key on that because there isn't one set. It's a residual left over from where we used the ball roll to straighten the toe out there. So I like that little bit of drag, maybe just a little bit less. Going here, beginning to overlap that foot. Going here, and really doing that. And then I got to go back to frame 1 now and kind of mimic that. Go through it again. Bam. Really drag that toe up, and then here on the next frame and put it at 0. Okay? Go ahead and push play. See what we get there just on the foot. So you can kind of see that it doesn't feel as stompy now on the feet because you get a little bit of overlapping action on the toe there, and it really kind of makes that feel connected and solid. So when I'm looking at the feet and just in general, they might be a little floppy. They might be a little too floppy, so it's really easy to adjust that. You can just go into the graph editor, select the ball roll there, go down here, control click, select the ball roll there, hit F, and just go through the animation and see, like, oh, maybe that's too much. I can, if it's too much there, it's probably too much here. So I can select that on both curves and go ahead and move that up a little bit if I want to. Okay, we'll pick that one too. Okay, and then you can kind of go ahead and play that animation, take a look if it's, and just kind of tweak from there. I mean, if you want to go nuts, you can kind of see that that's much too floppy, right? It's a little bit like a sock or something, but just enough, just a little bit to loosen it up. And to me, that really helps sell that foot contact. Really helps selling that the character's weighted and grounded, and it feels really right to me. Alright, now we're starting to refine the animation, adding the extra little bits in there, and it's on linear, so it's nice to see the in-betweens and how it's flowing and how it's working so far. So now I'm going to go ahead and start to put the X rotation in the walk, the overlapping action in that section. So I'm going to go ahead first of all and take all the keys that I have on that channel and the rotate X and go ahead and take all of them out. I'm going to go ahead and start on frame 0. And I've noticed that setting these keys on frames 0, 6, 12, 18, and 24, or the keys in the breakdown poses, works really well for getting that overlapping action. I may push it one frame ahead a little bit to get a little bit more overlapping, but I tend to find that right around those frames or just one frame after it can really make that overlapping action and that rotate X work pretty well. So first thing I'm going to do is figure out where the weight is. So I know that it's coming down, and when I do this I'm going to have to adjust things a little bit, which is a little bit of the pain of it all. But hey man, that's animation, right? We love it. So I'm going to kind of adjust that there. So I got my rotate X, it's up, and now it's going to be coming down. So on frame 6 I'm going to have it at its most down position. So it's going to be dragging there. Kind of move this forward a little bit. Okay, so we're getting that overlapping action there on the down, and then as it starts to reach up on frame 12, that's where it's going to start to drag back up here. And I might go ahead and take a look and see what I set. Pretty much 4.32 there. Okay, negative 4.32, just so it's kind of in the same world. I'm going to go ahead and get that straight back in the leg because that's critical and we worked hard to get it in there. So let's go ahead and make sure that we put it in there. So we got up to frame 12, and then we pretty much just do the same thing here. On frame 18 we know that's going to be the most down, so go ahead and kind of drop that down. Take a look at where we had it on frame 6, 7.9. Kind of do the same thing here, 7.9, and rotate X. And then we bring the hips forward a little bit, just get that center of gravity right over itself there. Make sure that's pretty much what we did here. Yep, and it is. And then on the final frame is the up position.
Alright, so where do we have it here? We had it at 4.32. Here, 4.32, and you can adjust yours as needed. Okay, I think that's actually going to be more than that, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, it's up. It's supposed to have been negative. Oh, it's negative 4.32. There we go. Bam! And then adjust that for the straight again. Make sure we get that straight back in there. Whoop. Great. So now let's go ahead and take a look at what's happening there. I'm going to go ahead, make sure that, yep, there we go. And it's linear, so it's going to hit a little bit and not feel perfect. So I can start to see, yeah, you see that little up and down overlapping action going in there. And for me, it's much too much. But that's kind of the benefit of getting to watch these walkthroughs, is you get to see the process pretty much in real time and see that, yeah, our animation sometimes looks pretty bad too. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through this and take down the rotations. So I think these down positions are much too much, so go ahead and bring those up. And when I do that, I'm going to have to adjust the Y translation, or the Z translation again, and then see these up positions, see if that's feeling a little better. So let's go ahead and go back to those frames that we adjusted here, so we don't forget. Yeah, actually that's the passing position, so I don't want it extreme. You know, the extreme forward or up position is when it's out, so I want to give it somewhere to go. So I'm just bringing that weight right back over the center of it. In frame 18, that's pretty close. Okay, and let's go ahead and see what we have there in that rotate X in the body. And it's feeling a lot better. So now I can see that the hips are rotating. They're rotating out and Y with each step. They're starting to rotate up and down with the body. I've laid in that foundation, and it's feeling pretty good. And at this point, we're pretty much ready to start cleaning up the animation. There's enough information in here where we can start to go through each curve and start to really dial in the up and down movement, the flow of the animation, start to really refine the feet, even though the feet are really close as far as having all the keys in there, all the information needed. The foot contacts are pretty solid. So now let's go into the final bit of refining the animation. Alright, now that I'm going to go through and start smoothing certain areas out, I may decide to leave certain areas in linear. I may switch things over and smooth them out and adjust the tangents. I'm going to go through the graph editor first and just make sure there's no redundant keys or anything that's unnecessary. So as I look here, pretty much for the hip control that I have selected, there is one additional key here that's pretty much, it looks like a redundant one. So I'm going to go ahead and select that and delete it. I'm going to kind of take a look here. I'm just looking briefly here at the animation and seeing, yeah, that everything looks like it's all pretty much in there. I'm going to go ahead and take out the squash and stretch. We can pepper that in at the very end if we'd like to. Not necessarily, and I'm not going to do that for this demo. I'm just going to really focus on the key areas here. Okay, so let's go ahead and start to refine the up and down movement, and I'm going to go ahead and select the Y curve and really start to play with that, because for me the up and down movement really defines the animation. It defines that bouncing ball that you guys have really learned and been studying, and just really trying to get in here and trying to make this look as close to as we possibly can. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to do here while I'm refining is probably start to delete certain keys and then mimic the curve by using the tangents, because I can get a lot more precision with the tangents than I can with having a bunch of keys in here. So one of the things I'm going to do is go to View, Show Buffer Curves, and basically what that does is it shows me a snapshot behind where my curve was. Now if I want to take a new snapshot of this, I could click on this button here, which is going to do a new snapshot, which now you'll see there. Or I can go ahead and use this one, which will swap that and then take a new snapshot of where the curve was. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that. And the buffer curve is really helpful for cleanup in animation. So I'm going to go ahead and remove a couple of these keys here and go ahead and start to play with the tangents, because for me that works a lot better. So I'm going to go ahead here, and you'll see it's just minor details, but it really does, to me, makes a difference in the snap and that kind of real precision in the animation. Okay, so here, probably have this come out a little bit. And same with this one. I'm going to unify that one and kind of mimic this down position here. And I may have to go back through the animation a little bit and adjust it. And that's quite alright. As long as my animation looks great or as good as it possibly can. To me, that's really what I'm going for. So, okay, I'm just looking at that up and down curve here, the up and down movement of the shot, and luckily it doesn't really seem to have affected too much of the legs, which is great because all the information is in there as best as I can get it in there. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this one here, this down position, because that leg is really straight, so I want to make sure that I'm not doing something too crazy. And I can see here that we kind of probably want to swap this a little bit, have it kind of come down, so that up and down. So the more I start to adjust this stuff, be careful, because it can really start to get some personality in the animation. And for this class, we're trying to just really keep it as vanilla, as basic as possible. Okay, so if you start getting a really nice up and down cadence, it's really going to look like it's a personality walk, and we don't want to do that for this class. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Just really looking at that up and down movement. So one of the things you'll have here on Bali are the layers, and layers are essential for me for cleanup. So I can go ahead and hide one leg and take a look at the animation, or hide both. So for the cleanup process, for me, it's pretty essential to do that. That way I can really just focus in on one area and really refine it, make sure it's working really well. And so that up and down movement is working pretty good. I can definitely spend a lot of time and really finesse that up and down and give it a little bit of snap, maybe not too much, but a little bit. But for this demonstration, I think that kind of gives you the idea of what we're going for.
Nick! Gotta get back to work.
Yeah. Good talk.
Yeah.
The next part I'm going to take a look at in the animation is that rotate in X, because that is where a lot of the overlapping action is going to happen. And right now it's just pretty straightforward and pretty basic. So I may choose to play with the timing a little bit here on this. Kind of have things probably just delay a little bit. Go ahead and break these guys. Really start to, on the way out, just kind of drag that a little bit. And probably at the tops here too. Also delay it from going to the next key. So instead of shifting the frame forward a frame, it can really play with the tangents. And the difference between just taking that whole curve and shifting it one frame forward is that the animation is going to have a little bit more snap to it in these areas instead of just being very even. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. So you can kind of see that feels pretty good. And again, it might be a little bit too much, depends on your taste, but for the demonstrations here, I think that gives you a pretty good idea. Now for the forward momentum of the walk, I don't want to mess with it too much. You know, I mean, this is working, it's working pretty good. I might just go ahead and put this on spline so that it flows a little bit better in those in-betweens, and take a look at that to see with the legs to make sure I didn't mess anything up too much. Make sure it doesn't get too far ahead of itself, and it looks like it might in a couple of areas. Let's see what happens if I undo that. I'm going to go ahead and undo that there. Does it still? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put that on spline and just leave that so that it's kind of just smooths out those in-betweens there. And then what do we have left here? We've kind of played with that. We've got this rotation happening here, which is a pretty even rotation. So I'm going to go ahead and take out these keys and go ahead and flatten that out. So it's going to change the dynamic of it a little bit, but not too bad. And that's just that forward rotation. It just kind of smooths it out. For me, that's probably the smoothest part of the rotation or of the animation, is that kind of rocking back and forth in the Y of the hips. Okay, cool. So that's going to take care of the hips for me as far as cleanup goes. That feels pretty good. The forward motion, the up and down, and the rotations, they're all feeling pretty darn good to me for that. Now at this point I could go in, kind of pepper in a little bit of squash and stretch on the up and downs, and that would just loosen it up even a little bit more. Similar on the down, kind of straight ahead and put a little bit of squash, go forward a little bit, put a little bit of stretch. But I'm not going to do that for this demonstration. If you guys would like to do that, please go ahead. Just make sure you're not doing it too much, otherwise it's going to really show, and you don't want it to show too much, especially the squash and stretch in general. But if you decide to do that, use the concepts from the bouncing ball. When it starts to drop down, it's going to delay a little bit, and then once it squashes on the ground, it's going to squash out a little bit. And I wouldn't go like, here's default, it's 0. I think the range would be like that and like that at most. I wouldn't go too much with it. Okay, so now I'm going to take a look at the leg positions, kind of go back through them now that the hips are dialed in, and not recreate any work for myself, but just kind of take a look. And here it's that Y translation forward. If it was a little bit more forward, it probably wouldn't be so straight in the leg there, and feel almost delayed. So I'm going to kind of take a look here and see if there's anything that changed, and nope, it didn't. So that's working there. Alright, so let's go ahead now and dive into the legs, each individual leg. Now the cool thing is there's just one control to worry about here, so we can really just dial in and really focus in on each leg. So let's go ahead and play the animation that we have so far. And I can definitely see there's a lot of pops and a lot of little clunky things happening there. Kind of on the leg a little closer to us, I definitely see blink, blink, right there, blink. Where it picks up, there's a little blink happening in this section. I think it has to go and have a lot to do with this leg being straight for so long. So let's go ahead and dial into that leg, and I'll show you a control that I really enjoy a lot, and that's the stretch. The stretch is going to help us out a lot in cleaning up the knees. That's really the big factor for knee cleanup for me, is just stretching the legs. And it's okay to do that. We're talking about fractions of numerical values here for stretching the leg. We're not talking about getting too crazy. But really this helps me a lot, especially with Bali. The knee pops stand out so much more on this character because there are visible points, such as this big ball right here and these big little ball down here as well. You can really see those points, and if they're popping all over, they really pop, 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 pop. Whereas if this is one single leg, you really wouldn't see that as much. So we're going to go ahead. It's important to know how to clean that up, and for me, I use the stretch here to really clean this up. So I'm going to go ahead, pretty much just straight ahead through the shot here and start to clean up a little bit. Okay. Let's see. And it may show too much when I do it, and I'll go back through the curves and really start to clean that up. So just really easing into that back and forth here, the roll and the flow here. And one of the things I got to note is how much I stretch. The default is at 1. There's times where I might not need to stretch at all, and I want to set it back to 1 and then like leave it as a linear tangent or a flat tangent. Okay, so from here to here, that's quite a big distance, so I might dial that back a little bit. So just kind of ease into that. I'm kind of keeping in mind the path of action here now. So it really comes in, hits hard, and then kind of slows in here rather quickly. So we'll see what happens here with this. I think that's going to slow in too much now. Bam, boom. So it goes up. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit more here. Okay. There we go. I could probably stretch that out a little bit more. Maybe down a little bit more here. And here I'm going to put it back at 1 and then give it some in-betweens here. At least there's at least one in-between, and we'll see what we get. Because sometimes just animating that back to like its default value really helps a lot. So there's going to be a pop there when the knee just stops. So I might have to go back into the hips and see what I need to do, or it may just play out once I hit play. So I'm really trying to keep an eye on that path of action. So it goes up there and then down. So this up is kind of bugging me. So I'm trying to get rid of that as best as I can. Okay, so just kind of playing those keys and seeing what they look like. And it's going to kind of click here. Okay, that's the big one right there. Okay, so we really want that nice push, but we got to be careful of how much. So right here, the animation feels pretty good, so I'm setting a key just to kind of lock that down. And then here I just need to be mindful of that bend, because it's got to kind of ease into this pose, otherwise it's going to be a huge pop. Okay, so let's see. So we've got here, here. Okay, this can be a little more straight. I have to adjust the next frame just a little bit. I might have to go into the graph editor for that because it's pretty finite amount. Okay, I might dial that back a little bit, or I may take the foot back a little bit more on this pose. So I think I'm going to try that first and see. I really like that pop though, that little push in the foot, so I don't really want to lose that too much. It's really just going to call attention to itself here, so I'm in a bit of a dilemma. So I need to figure out the best way to do this, and I'm going to figure it out here on the fly with you guys. And I'm going to try this one and just see what happens. So as it pops here, I'm probably going to have it go back to the default pose just so it's got somewhere to go to. Probably work on the swing of that foot there too. Okay, and then as it starts to swing down, okay, I might actually bring that in a little bit here. And then I like that. Go ahead and put that back to 1. Set the key. And just play and see what we get here. So I'm kind of looking at that knee, and yeah, it bounces up and down, but I'm just really trying to minimize the pops as much as I possibly can. And that's feeling pretty good. I could definitely clean it up a little bit more. But I'm liking that delayed push and that kind of quick swing through. It's feeling pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and unhide the leg here, and then I'm really just focusing in on that leg that we just cleaned up. Okay. So I can really spend a lot of time here really dialing it in, but for me that's really what I'm going to be doing, is just going back and forth and really refining that, kind of playing with the tangents there, and playing with where the stretch is and where the stretch is happening, and then leaving those long parts. You can see like in here where there's nothing happening, and that's great, and I want to leave it just where it is. I'm quite content with when that feels right. And yeah, am I going to leave it on linear? I am going to leave it on linear. It works pretty well because I'm setting pretty much a key on every key, and then maybe just a couple of frames of slow out here, and then pretty much a straight flat right there. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and refine this other leg here. So go ahead and push play. Take a look at what's happening there. This one's much more cleaned up. There's not a lot of pops happening in that one at all. I might just go through and take a look and see if there's any areas that I can clean up. Maybe a little bit in there. And I try not to, if it's working, and I'm not going to try to mess with it too much. You know, if it's working, why mess it up? So I'm going to kind of play with it here a little bit. So here we got that. Kind of that straight to bend here might be a little bit much. So we'll go ahead and set a key here. Maybe dial back just a little bit on that, so it kind of eases into it. Don't want it to turn to mush, you know, we don't really want it to look like mush, but we're just looking for it to not pop so much. So let's go ahead and click play there and take a look. Great, that's working pretty darn good to me. And so now it's just going to be going through each leg and really refining and smoothing out the different areas. And as you can see, the animation's working pretty good as it is, and it's in linear. And have I done shots where I leave certain things in linear? Yes, definitely. That works quite fine. It's a little bit lazy to do that, but if it works in certain parts and it kind of gives it like that little snap, then go for it. But if you really want to get in there, you know, I mean, that's kind of the fun part, is you spend so much time on the animation. You know, if it's pretty much linear from one frame to the next, I don't really need to clean that up. Even if I did, it's not really going to do too much there. So I'm just flattening that out, and I don't really know what's happening while I'm doing this inside, but I can go ahead and take a look, because with the foot roll I want a nice kind of smooth roll up and a nice kind of click down. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at that foot roll. So a lot of things, they happen pretty quick, but just kind of adding that little salt and pepper, that little spice in there, is really going to tighten things up. And again, if they happen on every frame, then I'm just going to leave it pretty much in linear. There's nothing on the Z, and translate Y, there's nothing there. Okay, there's a little bit going on in here. Probably refine this here. Just smooth this out. So you can go through the animation and just smooth these out as needed. Just make sure that foot doesn't go through the ground there. Just really smooth them out and see what you get. But yeah, I mean, you could do this pretty much all day long and just really make these work pretty much for each tangent on the foot. Alright, and so when we're done, the animation is there. I mean, the payoff for the vanilla walk is pretty much, you know, that it's walking, that it looks pretty cool. There's not a lot of personality going on, and yeah, I still see a lot of pops, and I'd probably spend about another half an hour just really going in there and really refining those knees, making sure they're not popping so much. Maybe a little bit more up and down, a little snap on that X rotation on the hips. Maybe not too much, because I don't want it to get away from it being a vanilla walk. But as far as this exercise goes and for this demonstration, I think this gives you guys a pretty good understanding of the overall process for blocking in a walk, taking it through to refinement. And as long as you have your main keys, breakdowns, and extremes, those up extremes, down extremes, you've got the general information that you need in there, but if you go right ahead and you start splining it, you're going to have a lot of problems. So what I recommend doing is going back in there and really solidifying those takeoff poses, dragging it like an extra frame, leaving it on the ground, and then really defining those straight poses by adding one additional frame of straight leg, and then really getting those feet slapping down on the ground. I think that's really going to really make the animation sing. And then the cleanup process is just going through, really refining and smoothing out each area as needed. So I hope you guys enjoyed the class. I hope you guys enjoyed this demonstration.
Wow, we've covered a ton of stuff in this class. I know it's a lot of information to take in. So just go ahead and try it out, practice it and see what you get, and then maybe watch the class again and see where you maybe made your mistakes and where you can kind of improve on different things. Now, although that we can see that animating a walk takes much practice, patience, study, and observation, we can also see that if we have our main key poses, our breakdowns, and our extremes, that the overall sense of the entire walk is already there. So take these key concepts and practice with them and see what you get, because hopefully this will be a stepping stone to all your future animations.
Mm.